What happens when a country says, enough, and snatches its most valuable resource right from the clutches of global powers? It's not pretty for the people who've been taking it for granted. Niger. Yes, Niger. That small, underappreciated country sitting on an ocean of uranium just did something the world wasn't expecting. They snatched the keys to their future right out of the hands of France, the so-called nuclear powerhouse. Uranium? It's not just a shiny metal to fuel power plants. It's a symbol of everything that's wrong with the West's stranglehold on Africa's resources. Niger finally decided it was time to kick the door open and take back what was theirs. And guess what? This isn't just about uranium. It's about sending a message and shaking up the entire geopolitical order. Think about it. For years, Niger's uranium has been quietly powering France's nuclear ambitions. France has been consuming Niger's resources like a drug addict, and Niger was the supplier feeding the habit. But now the tables have turned. Niger is saying, enough is enough. This could be the beginning of something much larger than just a resource grab. It's about self-determination. But why did Niger just throw a grenade into the global power structure by seizing control of its uranium? Let's find out. Let's rewind a bit. For decades, Niger has been the backbone of France's nuclear energy grid. But the relationship? Far from equal. While Niger's uranium has kept France's lights on, the country itself has remained in poverty, with resources flowing out to enrich a foreign power. Sound familiar? It's not just a one-off story, it's the blueprint for Western colonialism. In 2023, when Niger's military government took over, it wasn't just about reshuffling the political deck. They were making a statement. We're not doing this anymore. The uranium beneath Niger's soil had been a source of wealth for others, but the people of Niger were left with nothing. They were seen as nothing more than a resource base for foreign powers. The country's leaders realized that to change the nation's fortunes, it was time to take control of what rightfully belonged to them. By revoking Orano's permit for the Imuraran mine in 2024, Niger sent a message far beyond its borders.
Hello and welcome. We start with Niger in West Africa. The spat between the junta-led Sahelian nation and its former colonial power France is escalating. In the latest, Niger junta has taken control of a uranium mine, which was operated by a French nuclear firm called Urano.
This was a geopolitical earthquake, and France was the first to feel the tremors. What's at stake here is not just uranium. It's the very power dynamics of Africa and its relationship with the West. Niger's decision was symbolic, but it was also strategic. For the first time, Niger wasn't just asking to be treated fairly. It was demanding its seat at the table, in control of its future. It wasn't just about money either. Control over uranium means economic freedom. Niger could now reap the financial rewards of its uranium, instead of watching its wealth drained by foreign companies. With that revenue, Niger could invest in infrastructure, education, and healthcare, drastically improving the lives of its people. It's the kind of change that could transform the nation from a pawn in global energy politics to a key player in its own right. While Niger is ready to flex its newfound sovereignty, the global implications are just beginning. So what does this mean for France? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. France's dependency on Niger's uranium resources is not just a side note in the story of global energy. It is a foundational element of France's nuclear energy sector. When you look at the energy strategies of France, it's impossible to ignore the role that Niger plays in keeping the lights on. This relationship has deep roots and goes back decades. But the truth behind it is often obscured by political narratives that paint Africa as a passive player in global affairs. Let's break this down and uncover the hard facts of how France has quietly relied on Niger's uranium for its energy security. France is one of the world's leaders in nuclear energy. It produces about 70% of its electricity from nuclear power, making it the country with the highest percentage of nuclear-generated electricity among industrialized nations. This reliance on nuclear energy is a cornerstone of France's energy policy. But what many people don't realize is that without Niger's uranium, France's nuclear plants would not be able to operate at full capacity. Niger has long been one of the world's largest producers of uranium, and for France, it's been an essential supplier. As of recent reports, Niger provides about 20% of France's uranium supply. That's not a small number. 20% is a significant portion, and France has been unable to completely replace this supply from other sources. This has created a deep reliance, one that many don't fully understand, especially since France has been so adept at keeping this relationship under the radar. The history of uranium mining in Niger is a textbook example of neo-colonial exploitation. French companies have been operating in Niger for decades, extracting uranium with minimal benefits for the local population. France's nuclear energy reliance began as early as the 1970s, when French-owned companies like Orano, formerly known as Areva, started mining in Niger's rich uranium fields. Niger's uranium mines are among the richest in the world, particularly the Arlit and Imararan mines. These mines have been exploited by French companies for decades, and while Niger has received some financial compensation, the scale of this compensation pales in comparison to the value of the uranium being extracted. For years, France benefited immensely from this one-sided relationship, taking vast quantities of uranium while offering little in return to Niger, a country that has remained one of the poorest in the world. Orano, a French multinational nuclear fuel company, has operated multiple uranium mining projects in Niger, and these operations are central to France's uranium supply chain. But the profits from these mining operations have largely stayed in France, with Niger receiving only a fraction of the economic benefits. This has led to an ongoing debate about the fairness of these agreements, with many arguing that Niger's uranium resources have been exploited for the benefit of foreign powers rather than the people of Niger. This is where the story gets really interesting. Despite the apparent dominance of France in the global energy landscape, its energy infrastructure is deeply vulnerable to disruptions in the supply of uranium. France's nuclear industry is highly dependent on a consistent supply of uranium. If that supply were to be cut off, the consequences could be severe. What would happen if Niger, for instance, decided to stop exporting uranium to France? The consequences for France would be more than just inconvenient. They could lead to a serious energy crisis. France would face significant challenges in finding new sources of uranium, particularly ones that are as easily accessible and cost-effective as Niger's mines. The logistical costs alone of sourcing uranium from farther away, or from countries with less stable political situations, could send prices skyrocketing. France's nuclear plants could face delays in their operations, leading to energy shortages or a sharp increase in energy prices. And this is already happening. France has tried to diversify its sources of uranium, but Niger's proximity and rich deposits make it an irreplaceable supplier. Countries like Canada, Kazakhstan, and Australia also supply uranium, but none of them can match Niger's combination of accessibility, cost, and abundance of high-grade uranium. The reality is that France's nuclear industry has long been tethered to Niger's resources, and the country's ability to pivot away from that reliance is limited. When we talk about uranium in the context of global energy markets, it's crucial to note how France's dependency on Niger has global ramifications. Uranium isn't just used in nuclear plants in France, it's also a key resource in other nuclear-powered countries, such as the United States, China, and Russia. A disruption in Niger's uranium supply would reverberate across the globe, affecting not just France's energy sector, but the stability of the international nuclear fuel market. Niger's uranium feeds into the world's nuclear power plants, and many countries depend on its stable and affordable supply. If Niger were to suddenly take control of its uranium and cut off France, the global nuclear power sector would experience a shockwave. Other countries would scramble to secure alternative sources of uranium, driving up prices and causing instability in global markets. France, which already sources a significant amount of its uranium from Niger, would be forced to find new supplies, and the consequences would be felt far beyond Europe. Let's not ignore the geopolitical angle here. France's relationship with Niger is not just about energy, it's also about strategic control over a key resource. Uranium is not just another commodity. It is a critical resource in the global power structure. Nuclear power, despite its controversies, is seen as a clean energy source that many nations rely on to meet their energy demands and achieve their climate goals. With this in mind, Niger's uranium becomes a crucial lever in the hands of countries like France, who need to secure their energy future. In recent years, however, the geopolitical landscape has started to shift. Niger is no longer willing to be a passive participant in this system. By taking control of its uranium resources, Niger is not only asserting economic control, but also political power. This shift in control is forcing France to reconsider its approach to Niger, and more broadly, to its reliance on African countries for critical resources. This growing tension could create fractures in the historically close relationship between France and its former colonies. If Niger's move is successful, it could inspire other African nations rich in resources to follow suit, potentially altering the balance of power in global resource markets. The implications of this could reshape the global political and economic order, shifting the focus away from the West and towards Africa. Looking ahead, the future of France's relationship with Niger remains uncertain. If Niger continues to control its uranium resources, France may have to reconsider its entire energy strategy. The global supply chain for uranium could become more fragmented, and France may have to seek new partnerships with other nations or invest heavily in its uranium mining operations. So, here's the big question that's been simmering beneath the surface for decades. Why does France keep pretending it's not dependent on Niger? Why does it continue to label Niger as poor, even though Niger is fueling one of the most powerful economies in the world, and not just for a day or two, but for decades?
Everything that we only saw images of wasn't there. And it was, that make you cry. Like, as ignorant as this is, when we first was going to Africa, they was like, Griff, you ready to go to Africa? And I was like, no. They was like, why? You going to motherland? I said, I don't want no flies in my eyes. They still show these commercials, and it's probably a set like this.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? Through the village, and they stepping over kids, and they're looking in the camera, and they're like, I know. For 30 cents a day.
You could save one of these kids.
And then they put the camera on the kid, and the camera got 6 flies on the eyeball, like on the eyeball. And I feel like the cameraman can say, fly, we trying to.
But he chose to keep the shot.
Yeah, so when you hear, so the only image is, and then you feel so ignorant. You feel so mad immediately.
The truth is, France has been deliberately perpetuating a narrative of Niger as a poor, struggling nation, while quietly profiting from Niger's uranium resources. It's a classic example of the power dynamics at play, and the reasons behind this refusal to acknowledge dependence go far beyond just energy politics. To fully understand why France refuses to admit its dependency on Niger's uranium, we need to look at the long-standing power dynamics between the West and Africa. For decades, the relationship between European countries and African nations has been built on exploitation and control. The West has profited from Africa's vast natural resources while portraying the continent as impoverished, backward, and in need of help. This narrative has been used not just as a way to justify colonial domination, but as a means to maintain that control even after formal decolonization. For France, admitting that it relies on Niger's uranium would mean confronting the uncomfortable truth. Niger, a former French colony, is no longer the powerless, dependent country it once was. Niger is sitting on one of the world's most valuable resources, and it's using that resource to drive its agenda. By continuing to label Niger as poor, France can maintain the illusion that it holds all the power in the relationship. It also deflects attention away from the fact that Niger has long been the one providing France with critical resources that have made France a nuclear energy giant. By portraying Niger as poor, France keeps the world, and perhaps even itself, from fully acknowledging the uncomfortable truth. The West's prosperity has often been built on the backs of African nations. This narrative conveniently absolves France of responsibility for the fact that it's been extracting Niger's wealth for decades while offering little in return. The poor Niger image serves France's interests, allowing the country to maintain control over its former colony's resources without feeling accountable for the systemic inequality that has been created. Part of the reason France clings to the poor Niger narrative is tied to the broader, much-criticized Western approach to foreign aid. If Niger is perceived as a poor, dependent nation, France can continue to frame its relationship with Niger as one of generosity and aid. This allows France to continue justifying its historical and ongoing influence in Niger through aid packages and economic deals, even though the true value lies in Niger's uranium. This rhetoric also makes it easier for France to continue mining operations in Niger without fully recognizing the unequal nature of the arrangement. France can maintain its image as the benevolent benefactor and justify the extraction of Niger's resources, even though the economic benefits of those resources often stay in France. The poor Niger story keeps the public and international community focused on France's role as a helper rather than a beneficiary of Niger's wealth. Meanwhile, the West continues to send aid to Niger, but that aid is far outweighed by the revenue France receives from Niger's uranium. It's a setup that allows France to exploit the very country it claims to be helping while maintaining a veneer of moral superiority. The underlying message here is that Africa needs the West, but the truth is far more complicated. Africa's resources have been fueling Western economies for centuries, and that continues to be true today, with Niger's uranium playing a central role in France's energy strategy. At the heart of France's refusal to acknowledge its dependency on Niger is fear of losing control. If the world recognizes just how dependent France is on Niger's uranium, it would challenge the entire structure of global energy politics. France would no longer be able to act as the dominant power in the relationship. France's uranium supply would no longer be seen as an inevitable and uncontested part of its nuclear energy grid, but as a resource that can be controlled and manipulated by Niger. By continuing to call Niger poor and dependent, France maintains the illusion of control. It keeps the narrative firmly in its favor, where it is the dominant, nuclear-powered nation, and Niger is the poor, powerless country that can't survive without France's help. If France were to admit its dependence on Niger, it would signal to the world that the global balance of power is much more fragile than it appears. It would force France to reckon with the fact that its economic and energy security is tied to a former colony, a reality that makes the entire foundation of French geopolitical influence in Africa feel precarious. This is why the poor Niger story is so essential for France. It allows the country to maintain its power while masking the reality of its dependency. If France acknowledges its reliance on Niger, it might have to make significant political and diplomatic concessions, something it's not yet willing to do. Now, if Niger manages to keep its uranium and start controlling its resources, it's going to send shockwaves not just through Africa, but across the world. Let's break this down. For Niger, this is an opportunity to transform itself from a resource-rich but underdeveloped country into a powerhouse. The revenues from uranium could fuel an economic renaissance. We're talking about investing in infrastructure, education, and healthcare. Stuff that has long been neglected because the profits from Niger's resources have been flowing to France. But it's not all smooth sailing. Running uranium mines is no easy task. Niger will need to invest in infrastructure, develop the necessary expertise to manage uranium refining, and protect its resources from external threats, including militants who see these resources as fair game. The stakes are high, and the risks are even higher. Niger is taking on a massive challenge, and the path to success won't be easy. Globally, the impact could be huge. If Niger succeeds in securing its uranium resources, it could spark a domino effect across Africa. Other nations rich in natural resources might look at Niger and think, why haven't we been doing this all along? It could lead to a wave of self-determination across the continent, as African nations begin to realize their true power in global geopolitics. France, along with other Western powers, would be forced to reckon with a new reality. The days of exploiting Africa's resources without consequence are over. So, will Niger's bold move ignite a new era of African sovereignty, or will the risks prove too great for Niger to overcome? Let us know in the comment section. Are days of France's control on Africa over? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.